Admiral Kextara stood on the bridge of his massive flagship, watching the small blue planet rotate slowly below. His forearms crossed behind his back as he studied the primitive world through the viewport. The third planet from this yellow star looked no different from the hundreds of other worlds he had conquered for the Zephyrian Empire. Green continents, blue oceans, white clouds drifting across the surface like cotton in a gentle breeze. The Empire had been expanding across the galaxy for over 2,000 years. They had conquered 847 worlds and absorbed countless species into their domain. Some surrendered immediately when they saw the power of the Imperial fleet. Others fought briefly before accepting the inevitable. None had ever posed a real threat to the Empire's might. This world called Earth would be no different. Captain Jake Morrison was checking the morning reports aboard the orbital defense platform New Horizon when the alien transmission arrived. He had been drinking his coffee and reading about equipment maintenance schedules when every screen in the command center suddenly went dark. Then a new image appeared showing a tall alien creature with pale blue skin and 4 arms. The alien spoke in perfect English, though its mouth barely moved. "I am Admiral Kextara of the Zephyrian Empire's Third Conquest Fleet. Your species will surrender within 72 hours or face complete destruction. You have no choice in this matter. Resistance is futile and will only increase your suffering." Jake nearly choked on his coffee. He looked around the command center where 20 other officers sat frozen at their stations. Nobody moved for several seconds. The alien continued speaking with the same calm tone one might use to order lunch. "Your primitive technology cannot stand against our weapons. Your ships are crude metal shells. Your weapons use chemical explosions. You barely understand the basic principles of faster-than-light travel. We have observed your species for the past year and found you to be unremarkable in every way." The transmission showed images of Zephyrian warships. They were enormous vessels that seemed to be made of crystal and metal fused together. Energy weapons glowed along their hulls like angry eyes. The smallest ships were twice the size of Earth's largest battlecruiser. "We require your world's resources and your people's labor. Those who submit will be relocated to work colonies. Those who resist will be eliminated. You have 72 hours to broadcast your surrender on all frequencies. This is not a negotiation." The transmission ended and normal communications returned. Jake sat in his chair staring at the blank screen. Around him, the other officers began talking all at once. Someone was shouting about calling Earth Defense Command. Another person was already trying to contact the United Nations. Jake reached for his communication panel and opened a direct channel to Admiral Lisa Carter at Earth Defense Command. She appeared on his screen within seconds. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun and her green eyes showed no trace of panic despite having surely received the same transmission. "Admiral Carter here. I assume you saw our new friend's generous offer." "Yes, ma'am. What are your orders?" Admiral Carter leaned back in her chair. She had served in 3 different wars and commanded space forces for 15 years. She had seen politicians panic and generals freeze when faced with impossible odds. But she had also seen ordinary people do extraordinary things when their backs were against the wall. "Send them our response, Jake. 2 words, come try." The reply was transmitted on all frequencies just as the aliens had requested. Across the solar system, human ships began moving into defensive positions. It was not a retreat or a strategic withdrawal. Every available vessel moved toward Earth to form a protective barrier around their homeworld. Dr. Marcus Webb was in his laboratory at the Xenobiology Institute when he received the transmission. Unlike most people who focused on the aliens' threats, Marcus was fascinated by what he was seeing. He recorded every second of the message and began analyzing it frame by frame. The alien called himself Admiral Kextara. His skin was pale blue with a slight translucent quality. His 4 arms moved independently of each other, suggesting a nervous system very different from humans. Most interesting were his eyes, which were completely black with no visible pupils. or irises. Marcus pulled up spectral analysis data from deep space telescopes that had been tracking the alien fleet. Their ships emitted energy signatures unlike anything humans had ever seen. The power readings were enormous, but there was something strange about the pattern. He worked through the night running calculations and cross-referencing biological data. By dawn, he had made a discovery that changed everything. Captain Rick Torres was aboard his research vessel, Defiance, when the ultimatum arrived. His ship was technically classified as a deep space exploration craft, but everyone in Earth defense knew what it really was. The Defiance carried experimental weapons and sensor arrays that officially did not exist. Rick had been expecting this day for 5 years. Not an alien invasion specifically, but some kind of existential threat to humanity. He had volunteered for the deep space assignment partly because he wanted to be the first line of defense if something came from the stars. When the alien transmission ended, Rick immediately activated Protocol 7. Only 12 people in the entire solar system knew about Protocol 7. It was a contingency plan developed by a secret committee of scientists and military officers who believed that humanity needed insurance against cosmic threats. The protocol involved 23 research ships scattered throughout the outer solar system. Each ship carried a crew of volunteers and experimental technology that pushed the boundaries of human science. If Earth faced destruction, these ships would implement plans that most of Earth's leadership did not even know existed. Rick's orders were simple. If Earth was threatened by a superior alien force, he was to proceed immediately to the asteroid belt and begin Phase 1 of the protocol. He did not need permission from Earth Defense Command or approval from any government. The protocol had been activated, and that was all the authority he needed. The Zephyrian fleet hung in space beyond the orbit of Mars like a collection of deadly jewels. Admiral Kexthara reviewed reports from his scout ships with growing puzzlement. The humans had not responded as expected. Every other species in the galaxy followed predictable patterns when faced with Imperial conquest. First came denial and disbelief. Then panic and chaos as their governments collapsed. Finally, desperate attempts to negotiate, followed by inevitable surrender. The humans had skipped directly to defiance. Their response troubled him more than he wanted to admit. In over 300 conquest campaigns, no species had ever responded to an Imperial ultimatum with such casual dismissal. The two-word message, "Come try," suggested either complete ignorance of Imperial power or dangerous confidence in their own abilities. Kexthara studied the intelligence reports again. Human technology was primitive by Imperial standards. Their ships used crude fusion reactors instead of stellar energy taps. Their weapons relied on kinetic projectiles and chemical explosives rather than plasma or graviton manipulators. They had barely achieved faster-than-light travel, and their longest journey had been to a nearby star system, yet something felt wrong about this conquest. The humans were responding like a species that had faced existential threats before and survived them. Their ship movements showed tactical awareness that seemed advanced for such a primitive culture. Most troubling of all, they showed no fear. Kexthara had conquered species with far superior technology who surrendered immediately upon seeing Imperial power. These humans with their crude ships and simple weapons were preparing to fight a fleet that could destroy planets. Either they were the most foolish species in the galaxy, or they knew something the Empire did not. The Zephyrian invasion fleet moved into Earth orbit exactly 72 hours after delivering their ultimatum. Admiral Kexthara expected to find a broken species ready to surrender. Instead, he found human ships arranged in defensive formations around their planet like angry hornets protecting their nest. The Admiral gave the order to begin standard planetary bombardment. Plasma cannons charged with energy that could melt mountains targeted Earth's major cities. The first volley was meant to demonstrate Imperial power and break human morale. Tokyo, New York, London, and Beijing became targets for weapons that had reduced countless worlds to ash. The plasma beam struck Earth's atmosphere and something unexpected happened. The energy dispersed across magnetic field generators that the humans had somehow deployed in low orbit. The beams that should have vaporized entire cities instead scattered. harmlessly into space like light hitting a mirror. Admiral Kekstara stared at his tactical display in confusion. No primitive species had ever deflected Imperial weapons before. The energy requirements alone should have been impossible for a civilization that barely understood fusion power. Increase power to maximum and target their deflection systems, he ordered his weapons officer. The second bombardment was 10 times stronger than the first. This time, several of the human deflectors overloaded and failed. Plasma beams reached the surface and carved glowing craters into the earth. But instead of panic and surrender, the human response was immediate and violent. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez was aboard the Earth defense ship. Courage when the alien bombardment began. She watched plasma beams tear through the atmosphere and knew that thousands of people were dying below. Her orders were clear and she intended to follow them exactly. All boarding teams to the assault shuttles, she announced over the ship's communication system. We're taking that destroyer. The plan was insane by any reasonable military standard. A small human ship was going to attack a Zephyrian destroyer that outmassed it by 50 to 1. The assault would be carried out by Marines wearing magnetic boots and carrying cutting tools that belonged in a construction site rather than a battlefield. Amy's shuttle approached the alien destroyer from below where their sensors had trouble tracking such a small target. The shuttle's pilot brought them alongside the enemy hull and Amy led her team outside in vacuum suits. They carried plasma cutters, magnetic charges, and enough determination to make up for their lack of proper equipment. The Zephyrians had never faced boarding actions before. Their shields stopped energy weapons and projectiles, but they were not designed to prevent people from walking across their hull and cutting holes in it. Within minutes, Amy's team had burned through the outer armor and entered the ship through what used to be a maintenance hatch. Inside the destroyer, Amy discovered something that changed her understanding of their enemy. The Zephyrians were not the unstoppable conquerors they pretended to be. They were tall and graceful but physically weak. Their 4 arms gave them advantages in manipulation, but their bones were hollow like birds. Worst of all, they seemed completely unprepared for close combat. The human boarding party fought through the ship using weapons and tactics the aliens had never encountered. Amy's Marines threw improvised grenades made from maintenance supplies. They used their smaller size to move through ventilation systems that the tall aliens could not enter. When ammunition ran low, they resorted to hand tools and proved that humans were far stronger than they appeared. Within 3 hours, Amy Rodriguez had captured a Zephyrian destroyer using 20 Marines and equipment that cost less than a single Imperial plasma cannon. Captain Steve Miller was commanding Luna Base when the main alien fleet arrived. His garrison consisted of 200 defenders and weapons that were designed for asteroid mining rather than warfare. The base itself was built into the lunar surface to protect it from micrometeorites and radiation. Admiral Kekstara decided to make an example of Luna Base. He sent an entire battle group of 12 ships to destroy the human outpost and demonstrate what happened to those who resisted the Empire. The overwhelming firepower should have turned the moon's surface into molten glass. Instead, Captain Miller turned Luna Base into a fortress that confused and terrified the Zephyrian attackers. The human defenders used the moon's low gravity and lack of atmosphere to their advantage. They launched chunks of lunar rock at incredible velocities using magnetic accelerators designed for launching supply containers. The Zephyrians found themselves under bombardment from projectiles they could barely detect. Rocks weighing several tons struck their ships at thousands of miles per hour. The impacts created explosions that tore through Imperial armor like paper. Ships that had survived attacks from advanced energy weapons were being destroyed by simple stones. When the aliens tried to land troops on the lunar surface, Captain Miller's defenders demonstrated why humans were different from every other species in the galaxy. They fought in vacuum without life support systems failing. They used improvised weapons that should not have worked but somehow did. Most importantly, they refused to retreat even when facing impossible odds. The battle for Luna Base lasted 8 hours. When it ended, 11 of the 12 Zephyrian ships had been destroyed or disabled. Captain Miller had lost half his garrison but had proven that humans could fight and win against superior technology using nothing but determination and creativity. Dr. Helen Foster was working in laboratories buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains when she made the discovery that would change the war. She had been studying captured Zephyrian technology and energy readings from their fleet. What she found was both fascinating and terrifying. The Zephyrian Empire was not just another spacefaring civilization. They were stellar engineers on a scale that seemed impossible. Their entire empire was powered by a network of artificially controlled stars. They had learned to manipulate stellar fusion and direct the energy across interstellar distances. This discovery explained their incredible power and their ability to maintain such a vast empire. But Helen realized something else as she studied their technology. The stellar network that gave the Zephyrians their strength also created a fatal vulnerability. The stars were all connected through subspace energy channels that maintained perfect synchronization across the galaxy. If someone could disrupt that synchronization, the entire network would become unstable. Instead of providing power to the Empire, the controlled stars would become weapons that would destroy everything the Zephyrians had built. Helen's hands shook as she ran the calculations again and again. The mathematics were clear and terrifying. The Zephyrian Empire had built their civilization on top of the galaxy's largest bomb. All someone needed to do was light the fuse. Reports began reaching Admiral Kexthara from across the solar system, and none of them made sense. Human ships were attacking Imperial vessels using tactics that defied logic. Boarding parties were capturing destroyers with hand tools. Ground forces were being defeated by defenders who fought like they enjoyed combat. Most disturbing of all, the humans showed no fear of death. Zephyrian psychology was based on self-preservation above all else. Every species the Empire had conquered followed the same pattern of surrendering when faced with certain destruction. The humans seemed to view mutual annihilation as an acceptable outcome if it meant hurting their enemies. The Admiral studied intelligence reports about the human homeworld and began to understand what they were facing. Earth was not a peaceful garden world like most inhabited planets. It was what Imperial scientists classified as a Class 12 death world where survival required constant adaptation to hostile conditions. The humans had evolved through ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, and continuous warfare with each other. They were not peaceful explorers who had stumbled into space travel. They were survivors from a world that had spent millions of years trying to kill them. The Zephyrian Empire had made a terrible mistake. They had challenged a species that viewed extinction-level threats as normal Tuesday afternoon events. Worse than that, they had given these Death World survivors a reason to fight with everything they had. For the first time in his long military career, Admiral Kexthara began to suspect that the Empire might have chosen the wrong planet to conquer. Commander Alex Bennett stood in the briefing room looking at a holographic display of the galaxy while Earth burned above his head. The surface of his homeworld was scarred by plasma bombardment, but the planet refused to surrender. Every day brought new reports of human victories against impossible odds, and every day brought more alien reinforcements. The plan they were discussing was beyond audacious. It was completely insane by any reasonable military standard. Dr. Foster's discovery about the Zephyrian stellar network had opened a possibility that no one had dared imagine before. If the Empire used controlled stars to power their civilization, then humanity would turn those same stars into weapons against them. The mathematics are sound, Dr. Foster explained to the assembled officers. Their stellar network maintains perfect synchronization across 17,000 light-years. If we can destabilize just 3 key star systems, the cascade failure will spread throughout their entire empire. General P. Collins studied the star charts with the expression of a man who had spent his career planning conventional warfare. You're asking us to travel halfway across the galaxy, infiltrate the most heavily defended systems in known space, and somehow sabotage stars that are bigger than our entire solar system. That's exactly what we're asking, Admiral Carter replied calmly. Because if we don't, Earth dies and humanity becomes extinct. The Zephyrians have called for additional fleets. In 6 months, this solar system will contain enough firepower to crack planets like eggs. Commander Bennett had volunteered for the mission before anyone explained what it involved. His ship Liberation had been modified with every piece of experimental technology that human science could produce. The crew consisted of volunteers who understood they were embarking on a one-way journey into the heart of enemy territory. Captain Tony Jackson commanded the stealth ship Retribution, which would accompany the Liberation on the first part of their journey. His vessel carried weapons that the Zephyrians had never encountered and hopefully would never understand. While Imperial shields could stop energy beams and explosive projectiles, they were not designed to handle kinetic harpoons. Launched from railguns powered by nuclear reactors, the human approach to warfare confused the Empire because it ignored all the rules that had governed galactic conflict for thousands of years. Advanced civilizations used clean energy weapons that left no radioactive contamination. They employed precise targeting systems that minimized collateral damage. They followed established protocols that prevented unnecessary destruction. Humans used nuclear weapons like firecrackers and considered collateral damage to be someone else's problem. They built weapons out of whatever materials were available and powered them with whatever energy source worked best. Most importantly, they designed everything to keep functioning when all the sophisticated systems failed. Navigator Sophie Barnes had spent weeks plotting a course through Zephyrian territory that avoided major patrol routes and defensive installations. The route was impossible by Imperial standards because it required traveling through regions of space that were considered too dangerous for normal ships. Asteroid fields, gravitational anomalies, and radiation storms that would destroy most vessels were exactly what human ships were designed to handle. We'll follow the Broken Chain Nebula for the first 2,000 light years, Sophie explained while pointing to regions of the star chart that glowed angry red to indicate hazardous conditions. Imperial ships avoid that area because the radiation interferes with their energy systems. Our nuclear reactors and magnetic shielding should handle it without problems. The Zephyrians expected enemies to behave logically. They anticipated retreats when facing superior firepower and surrender when confronted with inevitable defeat. The concept of a species that would deliberately enter a radiation storm to avoid detection was completely outside their experience. Back on Earth, General Collins was implementing a defense strategy that violated every principle of military science he had ever learned. Instead of protecting major cities and industrial centers, he was evacuating them and turning them into elaborate traps. When the Empire sent forces to capture important facilities, they found empty buildings rigged with enough explosives to level entire districts. The Zephyrians kept expecting humans to follow predictable patterns of behavior. They assumed that any rational species would try to preserve their infrastructure and minimize casualties among their civilian population. Instead, they found an enemy that seemed willing to destroy everything they owned if it meant hurting their attackers. Collins had studied every historical example of asymmetric warfare he could find and applied those lessons on a planetary scale. When Imperial forces tried to establish forward bases, they found that every piece of equipment they captured was sabotaged or booby-trapped. When they attempted to use human communication networks, they discovered that all the channels had been compromised and were feeding false information. Most disturbing of all from the Zephyrian perspective, the humans seemed to enjoy fighting. Other species viewed warfare as a necessary evil that should be ended as quickly as possible. Humans treated combat like a competitive sport where victory mattered more than survival. The Liberation and Retribution departed Earth's solar system on a course that took them directly toward the heart of the Zephyrian Empire. Commander Bennett knew that most of his crew would not survive the mission, but he also knew that failure meant the extinction of their species. The choice between certain death and probable death was no choice at all. Captain Jackson had installed experimental cloaking technology that used principles the Empire did not understand. Zephyrian sensors detected energy signatures and gravitational disturbances. Human stealth systems worked by absorbing energy instead of deflecting it and using the ship's mass to create false gravitational readings that confused enemy tracking systems. The two human ships entered the Broken Chain Nebula while Zephyrian patrol fleets searched for them in normal space. The radiation that would have disabled Imperial vessels actually helped charge the human ship's nuclear batteries. The gravitational anomalies that made navigation impossible for most spacecraft were mapped and used as shortcuts by human computers that had been designed to handle chaotic data. After 3 weeks of travel through conditions that should have killed them, the human strike force emerged from the nebula at the edge of Zephyrian core territory. Ahead of them lay star systems that had been under Imperial control for over 1,000 years. Behind them was a galaxy that would either be freed from tyranny or reduced to radioactive ash, depending on whether their impossible plan actually worked. Commander Bennett studied the tactical display showing the first target system and realized that everything humanity had learned about warfare was about to be tested against an empire that had never faced a real challenge. The Zephyrians had conquered hundreds of species using superior technology and overwhelming force. They had never fought anyone who considered mutual annihilation to be an acceptable outcome as long as the enemy died first. They were about to discover that Deathworld survivors did not fight to win battles or capture territory. They fought to ensure that anyone who threatened their existence would regret that decision for whatever remained of their civilization. The stars that powered the Zephyrian Empire were about to become weapons in humanity's hands. The only question was whether the human crews would survive long enough to use them. The binary star system of Kethmorin had powered the Zephyrian Empire's core worlds for over 1,500 years. Two massive stars danced around each other in perfect harmony, their fusion controlled by Imperial technology that channeled stellar energy across thousands of light years. The system was protected by 3 defensive fleets and automated weapons platforms that could destroy entire armadas. Commander Bennett's ship Liberation approached the system using an asteroid as cover. The human vessel was running on minimal power to avoid detection while Dr. Foster's stellar disruption device was prepared for deployment. The device itself looked disappointingly simple, like a large metal cylinder with cables and sensors attached to its surface. "Remember, we only get one chance at this," Bennett told his crew as they prepared for what everyone knew would be their final mission. "Once we activate the device, every Zephyrian ship in the system will know exactly where we are." The Liberation dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system and immediately began its approach toward the twin stars. Human sensors showed defensive platforms awakening and patrol ships changing course to investigate the new arrival. The Empire's response was swift and overwhelming, but it was also predictable. Captain Jackson's ship Retribution emerged from the asteroid field firing kinetic harpoons at the nearest weapons platform. The Zephyrian shields deflected the first few projectiles but could not handle the continuous bombardment of solid metal traveling at incredible velocities. When the platform exploded, it created enough confusion for the Liberation to reach the stellar manipulation array. Dr. Foster's device was deployed directly into the stream of controlled plasma that connected the twin stars to the Empire's power grid. The disruption field activated immediately and began interfering with the delicate balance that kept the stellar fusion stable. For a few seconds, nothing visible happened, and Bennett wondered if they had failed. Then the stars began to change. The carefully controlled fusion that had burned steadily for centuries suddenly became chaotic and unpredictable. Solar flares erupted from both stars simultaneously, sending waves of radiation across the system. The energy conduits that channeled power to distant worlds overloaded and exploded like massive fireworks displays on the homeworld of Zephyra. Admiral Kexthara watched in horror as his command center's displays went dark. The power grid that supplied energy to 12 core worlds had just failed catastrophically. Emergency reports flooded in from across the Empire describing similar failures in other star systems. "What is happening to our network?" the Admiral demanded from his technical officers. "Unknown, sir. The stellar controls are failing in cascade patterns. Each destabilized system is affecting its neighbors through the subspace energy links. We Estimate total network collapse within 6 hours if the pattern continues. Bennett's ship was taking heavy damage from Zephyrian defenders who had finally realized what the humans were doing. The Liberation's hull was cracked and its engines were failing, but the mission was not finished. 2 more star systems needed to be destabilized before the Cascade would become unstoppable. Captain Linda Hayes commanded the second wave of human ships that had been waiting in the outer system. Her squadron consisted of 5 vessels, each carrying additional disruption devices and crews that understood they were participating in a suicide mission. When the Liberation's beacon signal confirmed that the first target had been hit, Hayes ordered her ships to attack the next system. The Zephyrians were no longer treating this as a minor border conflict. Every available ship was being recalled, from conquest operations to defend the core systems. The Empire's greatest strength had always been its ability to project power across vast distances using their stellar network. Now that same network was becoming their greatest vulnerability. Captain Tony Jackson's ship was dying around him as Zephyrian plasma cannons tore through its hull. His crew had managed to destroy 2 defensive platforms and several patrol ships, but the odds were becoming impossible. The Retribution's nuclear reactors were overloading and life support was failing throughout the vessel. Jackson made the decision that defined humanity's approach to warfare. Instead of retreating or attempting to surrender, he ordered his ship to ram the nearest Zephyrian battlecruiser at maximum velocity. The collision created an explosion visible from several light years away and eliminated the most powerful defender in the system. The sacrifice bought Captain Hayes enough time to reach the second target system. Her ship spread out across multiple approach vectors while Zephyrian forces tried to intercept them. 3 of the human vessels were destroyed before reaching their objectives, but the remaining 2 successfully deployed their disruption devices. The second star system failed even more dramatically than the first. The binary stars of Cathmoran had been relatively stable despite their artificial control systems. The triple star system of Veltharion contained 3 massive stars whose interaction required constant technological intervention to prevent catastrophic instability. When the human disruption field interfered with the control systems, all 3 stars began fluctuating wildly. Solar flares erupted in directions that sent radiation directly toward inhabited worlds. The energy conduits that connected the system to the Imperial network exploded with such violence that nearby space was filled with debris and dangerous radiation. Dr. Webb had been monitoring the cascade from his laboratory on Earth when he realized the full scope of what was happening. The Zephyrian Empire had connected their star systems through subspace energy channels that allowed instant communication and power transfer across the galaxy. When those connections began failing, the Empire was losing more than just electricity. Their faster-than-light communication system was breaking down. Their ability to coordinate military operations across vast distances was disappearing. Most critically, their knowledge of what was happening in distant parts of their territory was becoming limited to whatever information could travel at normal light speed. The empire that had ruled the galaxy through superior technology and instant communication was suddenly reduced to the same limitations that affected primitive civilizations. They could not coordinate their defenses, could not call for reinforcements, and could not even determine which of their worlds were still under their control. Admiral Kexthara received the last coherent report from the core systems before communication was lost entirely. 17 star systems had failed completely. 43 others were showing signs of instability. The cascade was spreading faster than anyone had predicted, and there seemed to be no way to stop it. The Admiral looked at the tactical display showing Earth's solar system where human ships were still fighting against impossible odds. His forces had superiority in numbers, technology, and firepower, but none of that mattered anymore. The humans had found a way to turn the Empire's greatest achievement into a weapon that was destroying everything the Zephyrians had built. For the first time in Imperial history, Admiral Kexthara began to understand what it meant to face an enemy that preferred mutual destruction to defeat. The humans were not fighting to capture territory or gain resources. They were fighting to ensure that anyone who threatened their species would pay a price that made victory meaningless. The stars that had powered the Zephyrian Empire for thousands of years were burning out of control across the galaxy. The civilization that had conquered hundreds of worlds was collapsing under the weight of its own interconnected technology. And somewhere in the expanding chaos, the few surviving human ships continued their mission to ensure that the cascade reached every corner of Imperial space. 6 months after the stellar cascade began, the Zephyrian Empire existed only in history books and the nightmares of its few survivors. Admiral Kexthara floated in the command pod of his dying flagship, watching the last of his life support. Systems fail while the stars that had once powered his civilization burned chaotically in the distance. The cascade had exceeded every prediction. What began as targeted strikes against 3 star systems had spread to consume the entire Imperial network. Hundreds of worlds that had lived under artificial suns for thousands of years now drifted in darkness. The energy conduits that connected distant galaxies had exploded with such violence that entire sectors of space remained too dangerous for travel. Admiral Lisa Carter stood on the bridge of humanity's newest flagship, the Vengeance, surveying what remained of the galaxy's former masters. The victory had come at a price that would haunt humanity for generations. Earth's population had been reduced from 8 billion to 4 billion people. Entire continents were uninhabitable wastelands where Imperial weapons had carved permanent scars into the planet's surface, but humanity had survived, and that was what mattered most. More than survival, they had won completely and decisively. The species that had threatened them with extinction no longer existed as a galactic power. Their fleets were scattered and leaderless. Their worlds were dark, and their people were refugees fleeing to whatever corners of space might offer sanctuary. Captain Jake Morrison, now promoted to admiral after his heroic defense of the orbital platforms, led the first human expedition to explore the former Imperial core worlds. What his ships found challenged every assumption humanity had made about their enemies. The Zephyrians were not conquerors by choice but by desperate necessity. Their original homeworld had been destroyed in an ancient cataclysm that left only scattered records and refugee populations. The empire they built was not driven by greed or ambition, but by the simple need to find new homes for billions of displaced people. They had conquered other species because they believed survival required controlling enough resources to prevent another extinction event. The irony was bitter and unavoidable. Humanity had destroyed an empire that was created by the same fears that now drove human expansion into space. The difference was that humans had chosen to fight rather than submit, while the Zephyrians had chosen conquest over cooperation with other species. Dr. Kate Williams had taken over the xenobiology research programs after Dr. Foster's death during the bombardment of Denver. She spent weeks studying captured Imperial technology and trying to understand how such an advanced civilization had made such catastrophic mistakes in their war against humanity. The answer was both simple and profound. Zephyrian technology was incredibly sophisticated, but it was also fragile and interdependent. Their ships required perfect maintenance and ideal operating conditions. Their weapons needed precise calibration and clean energy sources. Their entire civilization was built on the assumption that complex systems would always function correctly. Human technology was crude and primitive by Imperial standards, but it was also robust and adaptable. Human ships were designed to function. When everything went wrong, human weapons were built to work in hostile environments with minimal maintenance. Human systems assumed that failure was normal and success required constant improvisation. The fundamental difference between the two species was that Zephyrians had evolved on a peaceful world where cooperation and stability were rewarded. Humans had evolved on a death world where adaptation and resilience were necessary for survival. When those two philosophies collided in warfare, the outcome was predetermined. Captain Lavra Brooks commanded the exploration vessel Pioneer as it searched the outer rim of the galaxy for Imperial survivors. Her mission was officially described as humanitarian aid, but everyone understood the real purpose. Humanity needed to ensure that no remnant of the Empire remained strong enough to threaten Earth in the future. What she found in the distant star systems was both encouraging and troubling. Many species that had been conquered by the Empire were celebrating their liberation and attempting to rebuild their civilizations. Others were struggling with the collapse of the infrastructure that had supported their worlds for centuries. A few had simply vanished, their populations scattered or extinct. The galaxy that emerged from the ashes of the Zephyrian Empire was chaotic and dangerous. Without Imperial law enforcement, piracy and raiding became common problems. Without Imperial trade networks, many worlds faced economic collapse. Without Imperial technology, species that had become dependent on artificial systems found themselves unable to maintain their civilizations. Admiral Carter realized that humanity faced a choice that would define their future relationship with the galaxy. They could claim the Empire's former territory and become the new dominant power through force and intimidation. Or they could use their victory to create something different, a confederation of free species united by shared experience rather than conquered through violence. The decision was made during a council meeting aboard the Vengeance while Earth continued its slow recovery from the war. Representatives from dozens of liberated worlds had gathered to discuss the future of galactic civilization. Some wanted humanity to take charge and impose order through military might. Others begged for protection against the chaos that followed. Imperial collapse. General Collins, now serving as Earth's senior military advisor, argued for a different approach entirely. "We didn't fight this war to become the next empire," he told the assembled delegates. "We fought to ensure that no species would ever again face the choice between slavery and extinction." The solution that emerged was unprecedented in galactic history. Instead of conquest or domination, humanity proposed a defensive alliance based on mutual protection and shared resources. Any species that chose to join would retain complete sovereignty over their internal affairs. In exchange, they would contribute to a collective defense force that existed solely to prevent future empires from threatening member worlds. Captain Brooks received the first response to humanity's proposal while exploring a system near the galactic core. A transmission arrived from a species that had hidden in the outer rim for over 1,000 years, waiting for the Empire to collapse. Their message was brief but significant. "We have watched your war against the oppressors. We have seen what happens to those who threaten your species. We wish to join your alliance not because we fear your weapons, but because we respect your principles. You fought for survival and chose mercy in victory." The transmission ended with coordinates for a diplomatic meeting and a warning that proved humanity's reputation had spread throughout the galaxy. "Tell others what happened to the last ones who came to your world seeking conquest. The stars themselves burned to stop them." Admiral Carter smiled as she read the message and realized that humanity had accomplished something that no empire in galactic history had achieved. They had won a war so completely and decisively that the mere threat of human retaliation would prevent future conflicts. But more importantly, they had proven that it was possible to defeat tyranny without becoming tyrants themselves. The galaxy would remember the Zephyrian Empire as a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating primitive species. They would remember humanity as the Deathworld survivors who lit stars on fire rather than accept defeat. Most of all, they would remember that some species considered mutual destruction preferable to submission and planned their future interactions accordingly.